The trash talk between the United States and Canada continued on the off day. Will the Tkachuks play? And should Canada now be the favorite for Thursday night?
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Wednesday, February 19th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Monoman12. Follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers and on Blue Sky at LOFLA Panthers. You can follow the podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. And if you're on the YouTube channel, make sure to press that like button. So it is the second of two off days. We are just over 36 hours before puck drop between the USA and Canada for the Four Nations final. And man, it's just been such a wonderful tournament, and something so short is coming to an end, even though it's kind of felt a little long with just all the coverage that we have been doing here and everything, all the back and forth between these two teams and everything in between. And here to join me to discuss everything for the Four Nations here coming into this is Jacob Winans, because today is a Winans Wednesday edition of the show. And Jacob, I texted Nick this yesterday how he's a little spoiled getting the two post game shows, USA Finland and then the final. Unfortunately, we haven't had you for any of the post games, but how are you enjoying just this tournament overall?
Well, it's been awesome hockey. I'll definitely say that. First and foremost, it's been a nice alternative to what we're used to with All-Star Weekend. It's been competitive. It's been high energy. It's been fast paced. It's been physical. So for all those reasons, I love it. And then just selfishly as a Panthers fan, it's been very nerve wracking.
Yeah.
We've got the most guys in the tournament, and these games have been playoff style games. So you just want everybody to come back healthy. And we've had a couple of scares. Barkov forgetting that he's not a soccer player. And kicking the puck and then and limping off, and then Matthew Tkachuk appearing to pull something and missing the last game, and now he's expected to play tomorrow. But we will obviously have a lot of eyes on him to see how he looks physically, and then obviously Sam Bennett. Helmet off, throwing bombs with Brady Tkachuk. That's not a guy that I would love to be in a fight with. So you just hope everyone that's important to the Panthers run gets out of this healthy. So mixed bag, definitely. Some nerves as a Panthers fan for the long-term outlook of the season, but it's been fantastic hockey and I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, if you're on the Ottawa Senators side of things, you're probably thinking the same thing. Oh, as a Senators fan, Sam Bennett's not the one you want to throw the fists with, for sure. But let's talk a little bit of, you mentioned all the Florida Panthers going who have went to the tournament, and a lot of teams have returned to their respective practices, but the Panthers didn't have a practice because it was the travel day for the teams who have been eliminated, and the five guys from the Panthers who are making their way back to South Florida from Team Finland and Team Sweden. So a little bit of a benefit for those guys getting a little bit of rest, but not in a practice situation for the guys who aren't there. But Bobrovsky did speak with George Richards of Florida Hockey Now about his mindset going in to the break. His is basically the same as like a regular rotation, based on if he starts on one Saturday and then the backup goes on like a Tuesday and then there's 4 games off. His mindset is we always have a break, maybe a couple of days shorter, but usually you get a bye week. So that is a little bit reassuring when it comes to Sergei Bobrovsky there for the Florida Panthers here. So not worried about him whatsoever. But going back to the Four Nations here for Team USA. So Charlie McAvoy, scary situation with inflammation in his upper body, was admitted to a hospital in Boston, and it's just I feel for him because it's his home barn where he plays, and he didn't play on Monday, nor is he going to play on Thursday night for USA Canada. But Mike Sullivan talked about how Quinn Hughes is on his way to join the team for Team USA. And then he was spotted later that day at Canucks practice over in Vancouver. When they resume their action, NHL action, which crazy to think the quick turnaround from Thursday to Saturday after the high intensity we're going to see. They start in Vegas. So that's going to be a lot of travel for Quinn Hughes. And then also obviously, all the mixed messaging and just knowing what they can do and what they cannot do with the rosters. I mean, we saw with Thomas Harley getting on the ice when Cale Makar was ill, but not even being able to step on in a practice setting, which is so strange, which is a whole bunch of confusion. But also, I'm thinking Quinn Hughes was also on the original roster named for Team USA. So this is just a whole bunch of confusion when you think of whether he can or can not join. But also, he was also in a non-contact jersey as well. So is he actually healthy enough to play if he were to join and there happens to be another blue line injury for Team USA? So that's where I stand with that. How about you?
Yeah, it's there's a little bit of frustration. I feel like just given the lack of transparency with the rules for this. Now obviously in a first year setting, everything's not going to be perfect. It's a little bit of an experimental tournament, but you would have liked to see a little bit more transparency and a little bit more set in stone as far as roster rules and regulations here. I also think you want to have an environment where you're able to have true best on best. And I don't think there's anyone who would argue that Jake Sanderson, while he's a fantastic player, is better than Quinn Hughes. So if both guys were options, obviously Team USA is going with Quinn Hughes in the final. And I think you really, as a league, you want your best playing in a game like that with all the eyes on it. So I would have liked to see Quinn Hughes play in that game. It doesn't sound like he's going to, unless something strange happens injury-wise and they get him out there. But even then, he'd be jumping in without a single practice under his belt. So it'd be a weird situation for him. It's tough, but at the end of the day, I think the U.S. team has plenty on the blue line. They'll be just fine. It just would have been nice to get Quinn Hughes in there, especially considering he was originally named as one of the players on this roster. It's not like he's the injury replacement necessarily. He's a guy who was replaced due to injury and then is now trying to assume the spot that was originally his. So it's a little bit of frustration there, I feel like, definitely. And that's definitely a hole to fill. I think they will be able to do it, but I think everyone with USA Hockey would have preferred if Quinn was allowed to play.
Absolutely. And poor Jake Sanderson, he's there were memes all over the internet on what USA should do. There was a part of me that was thinking that whole Dwayne Wade LeBron when they were going into Dallas in the 2011 finals doing the fake cough impersonating Dirk Nowitzki there. But then at the same time, if you're Team USA and you're the management and this is not something that you're going to try to pull because eventually there will be questions around. It's just like LTIR with how legitimate injuries are. And if you're someone like Jake Sanderson, players talk around the league, and if you're a player, obviously, if you're on this roster, you're confident in your own abilities. It's nothing against the other guy in the case of Quinn Hughes. And then that would leave a sour taste in someone like Jake Sanderson's mouth if he were to say, yeah, we know you're not injured, but we want to get this guy in. And I don't think that's something that you should pull if you're Team USA's management. So that's something I think of a little bit here when it comes to just overall integrity for the game. So this is what the USA has. I think they're still good enough based on what they have around them, especially with how much we've seen from Zach Werenski, Noah Hannafin, Jacob Slavin. Those three guys, especially on the USA blue line, have been a big part into just how they got here in the first place. So that's another thing that those guys have been able to step up. Obviously, Quinn Hughes does make the roster a lot better just on his appearance and just how he's able to just carry the puck on his own out of the zone. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we are going to continue the discussion, and there's more trash talk between the two teams, and one coming from someone from the Canadian side, and is this something that we like from this tournament? We're going to discuss that next here on Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you guys all about wonderful pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with wonderful pistachios. Wonderful pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts, serving 1 ounce serving that has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Get snacking and cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Segment number 2 here on this Wednesday, February 19th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. Here with Jacob Winans on another edition of Winans Wednesday here on the show. And there's a lot of time to think. There's a lot of time to talk as well in between the off days. On Tuesday, we neither team took the ice for a skate. It was mostly just media availabilities. And, this gave an opportunity for the media to discuss with Brandon Hagel just of his mindset going into Thursday night. And obviously we saw the fireworks for what happened in the first 9 seconds of USA Canada. And then there was a quote that was heard around the hockey world throughout the last throughout almost 24 hours here, just how Brandon Hagel's comments of saying, "Oh, we play for the flag, not for the cameras here." There's a part of me that wants to say, Jacob, that we love hockey just as much as you guys. But then there's another part of me that says I love everything about this, because international play, with the lack thereof over these last 9 years, has really it's held back some of the personalities that have been put out there on just the spotlight. Because although the Florida Panthers and the Tampa Bay Lightning have won Stanley Cups in the last 5 years, they're still, as far as a national perspective, they still don't have as much of the spotlight there, because they like to focus on Toronto for some reason for them, that gets them their clicks. But this comment by Brandon Hagel, I love everything about it for when it comes to just hyping up just not only just games between two countries, but just teams that just want to beat the other. And also, Jacob, when I think of just the difference that we're going to see on Thursday versus what we saw on Saturday, is something that I had a conversation with Jackson Holzer after we recorded. Saturday was like a game 1. Thursday is a game 7. So I'm not expecting those 3 fights. I can't envision seeing more than one. Drew Doughty was asked whether he was going to fight Matthew Tkachuk, which they said that the Tkachuk brothers are good to go. And he said he'll do anything for the country, but I really don't think it's going to get to that point where it's just as much as we saw on Saturday night in Montreal.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the first game in the preliminary rounds, it's always about setting a tone. And for U.S. and Canada, I think they both kind of knew it was likely that they were going to see each other again. So you want to set that tone and sort of establish sort of claim your ice. That's really what that first game was about. So I don't think we're going to see the same thing. I don't think we're going to even really see any arranged fights necessarily. I think if there's going to be a fight, it's going to be off of a hit, or someone gets too close to a goalie or something like that. I don't think there's going to be anything premeditated as far as the fights go. That's not to say it's not going to be physical. The game's going to be fast and physical. There's going to be a lot of heavy hitting. The forecheck is going to be nasty, and there's going to be guys trying to get under everybody's skin. But I don't think it's going to be the same fireworks show of physicality that we saw in the first game. Drew Doughty being asked if he's going to fight Matthew Tkachuk, it's interesting. It's always something that gets attention. You raise your eyebrows when you hear Doughty and Tkachuk. It's well known those two really don't like each other, but I think Matthew would be stupid to even take a fight in this game, knowing he's coming off an injury and knowing how important he is to his team.
Yep.
I don't expect to see him drop the gloves at all. It wouldn't make any sense for him to do that. But again, Keith Tkachuk said those guys are lunatics, so maybe maybe they have other plans in mind. But just from an importance of the game perspective, I think it's better to have your best players on the ice, not in the box. So I don't think we're going to see the fights. No one wants to be the guy who either gets hurt and leaves their team a man down for the rest of the game, and no one wants to be the guy who's in the sin bin for 5 minutes and the team has to fill that hole. You want to help your team on the ice, not in the box.
Yeah, so I think the point in all of this is just to to lower the expectations on what we'll see as much as, and the numbers are updated from Saturday night. 10.1 million viewers, 15% of Canada's population tuned into that game. So for USA Canada, and don't know what the difference will be on a Thursday night versus a Saturday night, but the fact that you're seeing final is gonna grab a lot of the sports world's attention here for that. And also, speaking of sports world, did you see that Keegan Bradley walked into his TGL match with a Matthew Tkachuk jersey? Did you see that?
I did see that. I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, Keegan Bradley. I don't know how early you were in the Twitter era, but he had a residence here in South Florida, and he was tweeting a lot about the Florida Panthers at one point. He is from Boston, but he found himself at quite a few Panthers games, at least when they were still in their rebuilding stages here under Dale Talon for them. But I also think about this, about what's best for the sport, for revenue and building and hockey registration. It's best if the USA wins this tournament, as far as that's what the commissioner's office is trying to do. But as far as rivalry, we talk about Panthers Lightning all the time when it comes to rivalry. It's not a true rivalry unless you find a way to beat the other. It's the same. I feel it's the same thing for USA Canada here when it comes to just this overall as a rivalry. What's best, especially the fact that we're going to get international hockey more in the coming years with the Olympics next year, World Cup of Hockey in 2028, and then going back in 2030. I believe 2030 is France, if I'm not mistaken. But I just think about what's best for the sport as a whole. It's just a whole back and forth between. I'm not saying I'm rooting for Canada tomorrow night, but I just think about what's best for the sport and what's really building a rivalry. And once again, putting the personalities on display, as I mentioned earlier with Brandon Hagel.
Yeah, for sure. So the Hagel comments, I actually agree with you on that. I think that's awesome. Anytime there's a big game like this, it's always stirs the pot when you have a little bit of trash talk thrown one way, and what we call bulletin board material. It's something that always adds a little bit of flavor to these kind of games. So I love that. Especially given that it's also a player on the Lightning, and there's already been bad blood for years with the Panthers and Lightning, and now earlier this season in their first matchup, there was the dirty hit on Matthew Tkachuk, and there's already going to be scores to settle when they meet again later this year. So throwing in Brandon Hagel's comments, it's just like another pepper in the stew there. It's just going to be it's another thing that's going to be on players' minds. So I love that. I have no problem with trash talk and then adding some intensity to the actual game. But no, definitely the rivalry point is it's on point. It really is, because it's not really that much of a draw when one team just continues to beat up on the other team. The games may be good, but if you know the outcome or you have the expectation of the outcome, it kind of takes away from it a little bit. And we've seen a good example of that would be Panthers Bruins in the past couple of years. Great hockey. They always have great games against each other, but come playoff time, it's just the past couple of years, it's just been Panther dominant, and the games have been good, but you kind of know the Panthers are beating them in the big games. Historically, Canada has gotten the better of the US in those big games. Think back to 2010 in the Olympics. Then the Team USA beats them in the prelims, but then loses in the all-time thriller classic of an overtime gold medal game. if the U.S. can come out on top in a game against Canada, that's for gold, for a medal, for a championship. That's huge for USA Hockey to get a best on best tournament win over Canada. But also, I think either way this goes, I think we've already the pot is already stirring for the Winter Olympics when these two teams will likely be the favorites to end up in the gold medal game again. So any way this goes, I think it's good for hockey, but selfishly would like to see the U.S. beat Canada in this tournament, but also don't want it to get to the point where it's super one-sided and the games aren't good as a rivalry. So I'm happy either way.
Yeah. And and think about what the players are fighting for. Although the rosters in the Olympics are bigger, there's still bubble guys who are going to fight to make it next year. I mean, Sam Bennett, he wasn't even in my predictions to make the team in the first place, and then his great start got him into this Four Nations team. So we're gonna see Sam Bennett. I'm expecting a big one from Sam Bennett here on Thursday night for him as he's trying to make it once again for Team USA. Jake Sanderson on the American side of things, trying to make it again. So for these two teams, I mean, there's a lot to play for, not just now, but into the future, where that is where once again the Olympics is the mecca when it comes to just international hockey for these guys. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3, where we're going to discuss, with all the injuries for Team USA, is Canada actually the favorite going into Thursday night? We're going to discuss that more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Segment number 3 here on this Wednesday, February 19th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Wednesday, a Winans Wednesday edition of the show. So, Jacob, with all the injuries and everything we discussed earlier with Quinn Hughes not being able to come into the lineup unless there's another injury, I ask you this: is Canada now the favorite going into Thursday night's game against the USA?
I'm gonna say yes for a couple of reasons, and neither of them really even have to do with McAvoy or Quinn Hughes. It's actually the Cale Makar effect for me.
Yes,
he missed the first game against the U.S. And his absence was very noticeable. They struggled. It was their first game without Shea Theodore. Thomas Harley kind of gets thrown in there. They couldn't play him very many minutes because he had no practice time. Really, just got thrown into the fire. With him out and Cale Makar back in, you're swapping in the best defenseman in the world. That's a huge impact in my opinion, and I think that probably pushes them over the top, given that the U.S. loses McAvoy and goes with Sanderson. Not a huge, massive drop off, but McAvoy's presence was felt in that game. He was huge defensively in that one. Was a physical presence. Did a great job at advancing pucks out of the zone. Right shot D. Sanderson's a left shot D, so it shuffles things a little bit there. I think the defensive loss that the U.S. has versus the defensive gain that Canada has in this matchup may put Canada over the top as a favorite, not by much. And then also it seems like they kind of found their line combinations that they like. Moving Rhino onto the McKinnon line instead of the McDavid line seemed to really work. Reinhart gets 3 points with that swap. And then Braden Point looked fantastic next to McDavid on that top line. That's a lot of speed there. So the U.S. is going to have to adjust. Speed is not necessarily the U.S.'s game. They're more physical, especially in their top 6. So I think Canada probably is the favorite. That's a really, really difficult team to beat twice. Beating them once is one thing. Having to do it again is a whole other battle. And I think Canada's probably the favorite. But the one thing that could make this that could swing this USA's way is goaltending.
Yeah,
they've gotten rock solid goaltending. Canada has not. Binnington hasn't really had a great game, and it looked like he was on his way to one against Finland, and then really kind of collapsed the end of that third period and was bailed out by a great play by Sidney Crosby, because I fully think that if Finland enters the zone there and sets up again, I think Binnington was very rattled. I would not have been shocked to see that game go to overtime with another goal. So goaltending is a huge concern for Canada. I think if there's a way that the U.S. wins, it's going to be with some leaky goaltending in the Canadian net. They might get outshot by 10, 15, whatever it may be with the firepower Canada has, and they could still win because their goaltending is so much better on the U.S. side.
Yeah, and I think of okay, John Cooper is not going to pull a Jim Montgomery in a Game 7 type of situation where you Olmark started the first 6 and then you put Swayman in the last game for that. You got to show. And listen, he even said it even after the Sweden game. It's like, you saw how he performed in the overtime period. That's why you put him. And we talk about what Jordan Binnington of just about how he consistently makes up even after that bad goal. But if it's a 2-1 game like how it was in the first matchup, that could end up mattering for Team Canada there. But I do think that they should be the favorite here when it comes to just how their blue line is mixed up with them. So that's another thing that I'm looking at when it comes to just how it's constructed versus the USA on just how they're able to exit the zone. And then Sam Bennett spoke about it on SportsCenter yesterday about just their inability to get the pucks deep. The USA did do a great job in forcing McDavid outside and just circling, kind of how we saw with the Florida Panthers in a Game 7 setting for them, and just how they tired him out and just eliminated that speed for them. So yeah, I do believe that if Canada does protect the net around Jordan Binnington, he could see pucks, that it could be the difference. But the goaltending edge, once again, it has to be for the USA on that end. But we'll just see about what the USA can do, and just about how the Tkachuks and Jack Eichel are going to just mess with the opposition when they're on the ice. Again, Emily Kaplan was reassured that they'd both play. All right, so who do we want to see more from when it comes to both these squads? I'll go first. For the USA, I want to see more from Jack Hughes and Austin Matthews in this one. As far as the play for Austin Matthews and Jack Hughes, although Matthews only got one point in those 3 goals at the beginning of the third period, the give and go play, the off puck stuff for Matthews was outstanding for how he was able to distract the opposition and allow USA to get to the middle of the ice. That's going to be key once again for USA. Excuse me, but this is for Austin Matthews. This is although he's dealing with an injury, this is the type of game where you want to kind of prove yourself as far as where Toronto Maple Leaf superstars stand in comparison to the rest of the league as well. And then Jack Hughes has just been a little quiet. Did get off to a great start as well in the first game. So those are the 2 guys that I want to see more from on Team USA. How about you?
Yeah, those were my 2 answers as well. I think Hughes has been honestly invisible. I think he's really struggled with the physicality of this tournament. That's not really his game. I think he's a guy who would thrive in the Olympic setting with the bigger ice and just traditionally less physicality in IIHF hockey. I think he's more suited for that style. I think he's really struggled offensively finding his space. Matthews is a guy who, yes, there's the injury, but play style wise, I feel like he's more built for the physical style than Jack Hughes is. He's just kind of shied away from it. You don't know if that's injury related or what, but I think he's a big body, and I'm not seeing him get to the dirty areas. I'm not seeing him win board battles consistently. He's had a few good defensive plays here and there, but you'd like to see him be more physically dominant in a tournament like this and just sort of overpower guys the way Barkov did for Finland in some of their games. Barkov really had no help with the Finland team, especially defensively. But his presence was felt whenever he's on the ice. And Austin Matthews has the ability to do that when he wants to. It just seems like he hasn't been as engaged But outside of the two of them, I'd like to see a little bit more offense come out of the U.S. bottom six. I think Trocheck and Miller, they are guys who have good chemistry, and they do the dirty work. They've been there in the grit and grind of this tournament. But I'd like to see a little bit more offense from them, because Canada's bottom six is going to provide it, especially in a big game. They've got a team that has a lot of depth and scoring ability all the way down. The U.S. side is a little bit more top heavy as far as the offense goes. So I'd like to see a little bit more offensive scoring punch out of the U.S. bottom six. It doesn't have to be much, but if you can get a goal from a Trocheck or a JT Miller in this big game, the big guys are going to step up. You'd like to see that a little bit. And Kyle Connor is another guy that I would put on the list of guys who haven't really stood out that could do a little bit more offensively. So Kyle Connor gets on that same list there.
Yeah. Didn't say Kyle Connor because I've already said his name like 2 or 3 times before this recording this show. So it's like, okay, choose someone else for me. But on the Canadian side of things, for them, 2 guys, I'm going to choose Mitch Marner and Devon Toews for Team Canada. Mitch Marner, although he did have a big moment in the first game against Sweden, he's now down in the lineup. He's on the wing while Anthony Cirelli centers the third line, and Brandon Hagel. And great for John Cooper to separate the Tampa Bay Lightning line. Those guys don't even play together while they're on their club team. So, but I will say, with Mitch Marner being the two-way force that he is, who could be on the power play and also be on the top PK unit for them, there's a little bit of sacrifice that he's doing for his squad here. So I want to see what can happen when Anthony Cirelli, who's great in the faceoff dot, what happens on when he gets the puck and how he's able to get to the net if the USA does allow those open spaces, and then just being better when it comes to just winning his overall battles. And for Devon Toews, he has his partner back for Cale Makar, so I'm interested to see how the puck support is going to be for those guys whenever Devon Toews does come on for the battles, especially when it's right at their blue line. And there's been times where he's just been a little careless with the puck and just not fighting the forechecks well for the opposition. So I just want to those are 2 players that I want to see more from Team Canada.
Yeah, those are good ones. I think Marner has been pretty much invisible after the Sweden game, and Devon Toews has definitely struggled. But for me, I'm going to go with 2 other guys. I'm going to go with Travis Sanheim on defense. I think for his size, he's got to be a lot more physical in a tournament like this. He's a guy who a lot of people didn't even necessarily feel like should have made the team, and I felt like he was going to come in with a lot to prove. And I thought that was going to show in his physical play, and I think he could really up the physicality, given that he's one of the bigger guys here. Canada's got a couple of those twin towers back there of Sanheim and Colton Parayko. I feel like Parayko has really announced his presence physically, but Sanheim kind of hasn't. So I'd like to see him step it up in the physicality department. And also the Canada fourth line. I feel like they have a job to do. It's to piss off the opposition, to forecheck hard. But at some point, you're going to need to get something from that fourth line offensively. Brad Marchand is the guy that I'm looking at to step it up in a big game. He's someone who has a lot of big game experience, not necessarily a ton of big game success, but he's played in a lot of big games, and he's more than capable. I think he's done his job as a pest. The trash talk is there, the after the whistle stuff is there, the forechecking, the all of the things that make Brad Marchand are there right now, except there's really just been no offense. And I think it's kind of been a revolving door of guys on that fourth line. I think they found the perfect balance with Bennett, Marchand, Konechny. I think that's what you go with. I don't think Seth Jarvis really fits this style. So I think maybe you get something out of that trio in the USA game. But I thought Bennett and Marchand together would be a little bit more of a thorn in everybody's side. I'd like to see that group step it up a little bit. But Brad Marchand is sort of the ringleader of that. He's got to lead by example on that line.
No doubt. And right before we sign off, FanDuel has the game lines for USA and Canada. Right now, the spread is minus 300 for 1.5 for Team Canada, while it's plus 235 for the Team USA. So it looks like that Canada, it's reflected in the sports books that Canada is the favorite here. Money line is minus 110, and the over under for goals is 5.5. I think it's gonna be. I'm going the under for this one. I think. How about you? You say under or over?
I'm going under. It's going to be a cautious game defensively, and the goaltending is going to show up.
Yeah, well, yeah. So I'm with you. I'm with you there. But that's going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Jacob, thank you once again for joining me on another edition of Winans Wednesday. Tell everybody where they can follow you online, my friend.
Yep, you can follow me on X at Jacob Winans 8.
And thank you so much. And I will see you next week as we will resume our Florida Panthers talk for the sprint to the end of the season. So see you next week, my friend.
Finally, looking forward to it.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone, and Steel Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Jacob Winans, and you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.